The whispers started as soon as Katherine Cole arrived in Redemption Springs in the summer of 1876, her threadbare dress doing little to conceal the marks that lined her arms or the deep scar that traced her jawline, constant reminders of a past she'd traveled over 200 miles to escape. The frontier town of Redemption Springs sprawled across the Wyoming Territory like a collection of wooden matchboxes scattered by a careless hand. Its main street was little more than a wide dirt road lined with hitching posts, wooden boardwalks, and buildings weathered by the harsh western elements. The town had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, drawn by rumors of silver in the nearby mountains and the promise of the expanding railroad. Catherine stood at the edge of town, her meager belongings packed into a single leather satchel. At 22, she had seen more cruelty than most people experienced in a lifetime. She adjusted the high collar of her dress despite the summer heat, a futile attempt to hide the bruises that had faded from purple to a sickly yellow. The stagecoach that had brought her rattled away behind her, leaving her alone in a cloud of dust. The sun beat down mercilessly as she walked toward the town's only boarding house, a 3-story structure with peeling white paint and a crooked sign that read, "Mrs. Goodwin's Lodgings." Each step was measured, calculated to prevent wincing from the pain that still radiated from her ribs. "Looking for a room, miss?" asked the proprietor, a stout woman with gray streaked hair pinned severely at the nape of her neck. "Yes, madam. I'm hoping to find work as well," Catherine replied, her voice soft but determined. Mrs. Goodwin's eyes narrowed as they traced the visible scar on Catherine's jaw. "Work's scarce for women, unless you're looking to tend bar or—" She trailed off meaningfully. Catherine straightened her shoulders. "I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts. I'm a hard worker." Mrs. Goodwin seemed to consider this. "The general store might need help. Mr. Peterson lost his wife last winter. His daughter tries to manage the books, but she's just a girl." She named a price for the room that nearly emptied Catherine's small purse, but she paid without complaint. A fresh start was worth every penny. The room was small, but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand beneath a window that overlooked the dusty main street. Catherine set down her bag and allowed herself a moment of relief. In Redemption Springs, no one knew her story. No one knew about Thomas Blackburn, the man who had nearly killed her back in Missouri. No one knew how she had finally found the courage to run after 3 years of marriage that had turned her body into a map of pain. Catherine slept fitfully that first night, waking at every creak and distant shout from the saloon down the street. By dawn, she was already dressed and making her way to Peterson's general store, her steps quick and purposeful despite her lingering injuries. Mr. Peterson was a gaunt man with kind eyes that didn't quite match the permanent frown on his face. His 12-year-old daughter, Emma, peered curiously at Catherine from behind stacked crates of canned goods. "Mrs. Goodwin said you might need help," Catherine began. "Can you count?" Peterson asked bluntly. When Catherine nodded, he gestured to the ledger on the counter. "Show me." Under his watchful eye, Catherine demonstrated her ability with figures, carefully balancing columns and calculating inventory with an efficiency that finally brought a hint of approval to Peterson's expression. "You can start today, 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Emma needs time for her schooling." The pay was modest, but it was honest work that wouldn't require Catherine to smile at drunken men or endure unwanted touches. She accepted gratefully and threw herself into learning the business. Days passed into weeks. Catherine kept to herself, lodging at Mrs. Goodwin's and working diligently at the store. She became familiar with the townsfolk who frequented Peterson's, the blacksmith's wife, with her brood of 5 children, the schoolteacher who ordered special paper from back east, the ranchers who came in for supplies. It was on a sweltering August afternoon that she first saw him. Owen Lawrence rode into town leading a string of horses, dust clinging to his denim pants and cotton shirt. His broad shoulders and the easy way he sat in the saddle spoke of a man comfortable with hard work and long days under the open sky. Katherine was arranging a display of fabric when he entered the store, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Mr. Peterson," he called, nodding to the store owner. "Got those supplies ready for the double L?" Peterson nodded. "Been expecting you, Lawrence. Miss Cole here can help you while I finish with Mrs. Johnson." Owen's blue eyes shifted to Katherine, and she felt a flutter of unease. Men's gazes had brought nothing but trouble in her experience. "Miss Cole?" he greeted her politely, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Owen Lawrence. My brother and I run the Double L Ranch about 10 miles north of town." "What supplies do you need, Mr. Lawrence?" Katherine asked, keeping her voice professional as she moved behind the counter. He handed her a list, and their fingers brushed briefly. Katherine stiffened but maintained her composure as she began gathering the items: flour, coffee, ammunition, tobacco, and various tools. "New to town?" Owen asked conversationally as she worked. "Yes." Katherine didn't elaborate, focusing on her task. "Redemption Springs is a good place," he continued, "growing fast, but still got a sense of community." Katherine nodded, not encouraging further conversation, but Owen didn't seem bothered by her reticence. As she tallied his purchases, she was aware of his gaze lingering on the scar along her jaw. Self-consciously, she turned her face slightly, using her hair to shield it from view. "That'll be $4.63, she said. Owen paid without comment, then helped load the supplies onto his wagon. Before leaving, he paused at the door and turned back. "Miss Cole?" he called softly. "The church socials this Sunday after services. Whole town turns out. Might be a good way to meet folks." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, then settled his hat back on his head and departed. Katherine watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, leading the wagon. Something about his easy manner and the fact that he hadn't pressed her for details about herself made her curious. But curiosity was dangerous. Getting close to people meant they'd eventually see all of her scars and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Sunday came, and Katherine found herself standing outside the white wooden church, listening to the congregation singing hymns within. She hadn't planned to attend the social, but after a week of Mrs. Goodwin's pointed hints that decent folk attend church, she'd finally relented. The service was mercifully short, the elderly Reverend Michaels keeping his sermon to a concise 20 minutes on the virtues of neighborliness. Afterward, tables were set up in the adjacent meadow, laden with food brought by the townsfolk. Katherine had baked a simple apple pie, using a recipe her grandmother had taught her long ago, before life had taken such dark turns. "Miss Cole?" A familiar voice greeted her as she set her pie on the dessert table. "You decided to come." Katherine turned to find Owen Lawrence standing nearby, looking different in his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. Beside him stood a slightly shorter man with the same blue eyes and easy smile. "This is my brother Liam," Owen introduced. "Liam, this is Miss Katherine Cole from Peterson's store." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Cole," Liam said with a tip of his hat. "My brother mentioned you're new to town." Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Goodwin appeared at her elbow, eyes bright with the possibility of gossip. "I see you've met the Lawrence boys," she said. "Finest ranch in the county, the Double L. Built it up from nothing after their parents passed. God rest their souls." Katherine nodded politely, uncomfortable with the attention. "If you'll excuse me, I should help with the serving." As she moved away, she felt the weight of curious stares. The women of Redemption Springs had been watching her since her arrival, their gazes a mixture of pity and speculation whenever they glimpsed her scars. The afternoon progressed pleasantly enough. Katherine kept busy helping serve food and cleaning up afterward, which gave her a purpose and limited the need for small talk. As the gathering began to disperse, she found herself approached by the mayor's wife, a plump woman named Harriet Wilson. "Miss Cole," she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Several of us ladies are wondering where you came from. It's so unusual for a young woman to arrive alone, without family or connections." The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Katherine felt heat rising to her face. "Missouri," she answered simply. "I came for a fresh start." "And those marks?" Mrs. Wilson's eyes flicked to Katherine's jaw, and the bruises that were still visible on her wrists where her sleeves had ridden up. "An accident, was it?" Before Katherine could respond, another voice cut in. "Mrs. Wilson, I believe your husband is looking for you by the wagons." Owen Lawrence stood a few paces away, his expression neutral, but his eyes hard as they met the older woman's gaze. "Well?" Mrs. Wilson sniffed, clearly disappointed at the interruption. "We'll continue our chat another time, Miss Cole." As she waddled away, Katherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Owen stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "People can be too curious for their own good sometimes." "Or mine," Katherine replied with a hint of bitterness. Owen studied her for a moment, then nodded toward her empty plate. "May I walk you back to town?" Katherine hesitated. Kindness from men usually came with expectations, but there was something in Owen's steady gaze that didn't set off the alarms that had become her constant companions. "I can manage," she said finally. Owen accepted her refusal with a nod. "Of course. Good day, Miss Cole." As he walked away, Katherine found herself watching him, the straight line of his shoulders, the confident stride. There was something different about Owen Lawrence, something that didn't fit with her experience of men. It was unsettling, but not entirely in an unpleasant way. The weeks that followed brought a routine that Katherine found comforting in its predictability. She worked at the store 6 days a week, took her meals at Mrs. Goodwin's, and spent her evenings alone in her room, reading books borrowed from the small-town library or sewing to mend her limited wardrobe. Owen Lawrence came to the store every 2 weeks for supplies. His visits were always polite, never lingering too long, but always including some small gesture of kindness, bringing a book he thought she might enjoy, or mentioning that the wildflowers were particularly beautiful along the North Road. It was during one of these visits in early October that the peace Katherine had carefully constructed began to crack. She was alone in the store, Mr. Peterson having gone to the bank, when 3 cowhands from the Bar M Ranch swaggered in, already half drunk despite the early hour. "Well, look what we have here," the tallest one drawled, leaning against the counter. "Peterson's finally hired something worth looking at." Katherine kept her expression neutral. "Can I help you gentlemen find something?" "Depends on what you're offering," another said with a leer. Katherine stepped back slightly. "We have tobacco, ammunition, and dry goods. What do you need?" The third man, red-faced and sweating, moved to block her path to the door. "Don't be so businesslike, darling. We're just being friendly." "I'd appreciate it if you'd make your purchases and move along," Katherine said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. These men reminded her too much of Thomas, the same entitled swagger, the same predatory gaze. "What happened to your face, sweetheart?" the tall one asked, reaching across the counter to touch her scar. "Some man get rough with you?" Katherine jerked away. "Please don't touch me." The men laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the small store. "Looks like she's been passed around before," the red-faced one commented. "See them bruises? Bet she's used to a firm hand." Katherine's heart pounded as they moved closer. She calculated her chances of reaching the shotgun Peterson kept beneath the counter. The bell above the door jangled, and all 4 heads turned to see Owen Lawrence standing in the doorway, his expression darkening as he assessed the situation. Problem here, Miss Cole? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. No problem, the tall cowhand answered. Just getting to know the local talent. Owen stepped fully into the store, letting the door close behind him. Though he didn't touch the revolver holstered at his hip, his stance made it clear he wouldn't hesitate to use it. Miss Cole asked you to make your purchases and leave, he said evenly. I suggest you do exactly that. A tense moment passed before the tall cowhand shrugged. We were just leaving anyway. This place don't have what we're looking for. As they filed past Owen, the red-faced one muttered something under his breath that made his companions snicker. Owen's hand shot out, grabbing the man's collar and pulling him close. You want to repeat that where I can hear it? He asked quietly. No, the man stammered, suddenly sober. No, sir. Owen released him with a slight push toward the door. Don't come back when you're drinking. After they'd gone, Katherine released a shaky breath. Thank you. Are you all right? Owen asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Katherine nodded, though her hands trembled as she straightened items on the counter. Yes. Mr. Peterson should be back soon. Owen didn't move from his spot by the door. Katherine, he said, the first time he'd used her given name. Those men, what they said about your scars. Please, she interrupted. I'd rather not discuss it. Owen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if you ever do want to talk, I'm a good listener. The sincerity in his voice made Katherine look up, really look at him for the first time. What she saw in his eyes wasn't pity or morbid curiosity, but a simple offer of friendship with no strings attached. I appreciate that, she said softly, but some stories are better left untold. Owen didn't press the issue, instead moving on to the reason for his visit, ordering supplies for the upcoming winter months. By the time Mr. Peterson returned, their interaction had returned to its usual polite efficiency, but something had shifted between them, a tentative bridge across the chasm Katherine had built around herself. As October gave way to November, the first snowfall dusted Redemption Springs, transforming the dusty frontier town into something almost ethereal. Katherine found herself spending more time at the church socials and town gatherings, gradually allowing herself to form cautious friendships with some of the women her age. It was at the Thanksgiving celebration in the town hall that she found herself seated next to Owen at the long communal table. The entire town had contributed to the feast, and the atmosphere was jovial as plates were passed and glasses filled. Your pie is causing quite a stir, Owen commented as he watched the dessert table being rapidly depleted. Mrs. Wilson has asked for the recipe 3 times. Katherine smiled slightly. My grandmother's secret was adding a pinch of pepper to the apples. Brings out the sweetness. A woman of many talents, Owen said, his eyes crinkling with his smile. Peterson tells me you've increased his profits by 15% since you started managing his books. Katherine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room. I enjoy working with numbers. They're predictable. Unlike people? Owen observed shrewdly. Yes, she agreed. Unlike people. Their conversation flowed easily after that, touching on books they'd both read, the changes coming to the territory, the possibility of statehood. Katherine found herself laughing at Owen's dry observations about some of the town's more colorful characters, a sound that felt foreign after so long. As the evening wound down, Owen offered to walk her back to Mrs. Goodwin's. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky above them. Their breath fogged in the air as they walked in comfortable silence. You know, Owen said as they neared the boarding house, my mother used to say that snowfall was God's way of giving the world a clean start, covering up all the dirt and mess, letting everything begin again. Katherine considered this. I like that idea. Though spring always comes and melts it all away. True, Owen acknowledged, but by then, what's underneath has had time to change. New growth, new possibilities. They stopped at the steps to Mrs. Goodwin's porch. Catherine looked up at Owen, studying his face in the moonlight. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't even know me." Owen seemed to consider his answer carefully. "I know enough. I know you're brave, coming to a strange town alone. I know you're smart and hardworking. I know you treat everyone with respect, even those who don't deserve it." He paused. "And I know that whatever happened to you before, it doesn't define who you are now." Catherine felt tears prickle behind her eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It can be," he said gently, "if you let it." Before she could respond, Mrs. Goodwin's silhouette appeared in the window, clearly monitoring their conversation. Owen chuckled. "I'd better let you go before your reputation suffers irreparable harm," he said. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Owen," she replied, watching as he turned and walked back toward the livery where he'd left his horse. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old boarding house settling, Catherine found herself thinking about Owen's words. A clean start. New possibilities. She touched the scar along her jaw, tracing its familiar path. For 3 years, Thomas Blackburn had systematically broken her down, first with words, then with fists, until she believed she deserved the pain. It had taken every ounce of courage she possessed to flee in the night after he'd beaten her so badly she feared the next time would be the last. Could she really leave it all behind? Not just physically, but in her heart and mind? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The winter deepened, bringing harsh storms that sometimes isolated Redemption Springs for days at a time. Catherine's friendship with Owen grew through these quiet months. He began stopping by the store more frequently, sometimes just to bring her a book or share news from his ranch. In January, when a particularly violent blizzard struck, Owen rode into town ahead of the storm with his brother to help distribute supplies and ensure everyone was prepared. Catherine watched from the store window as he helped the blacksmith board up his shop windows, his movements efficient despite the biting cold. When he came into the store, snow melting on his shoulders, his face was red from the wind, but his eyes were bright. "Peterson," he called, "got those extra blankets ready? I'm heading over to the widow Murray's place. She's alone with those 3 young ones." Mr. Peterson nodded, gathering a stack of thick woolen blankets. Miss Cole put together some food packages too, enough to last a week if the storm holds. Owen's appreciative glance made Catherine duck her head in modest embarrassment. "Smart thinking," he said. "This one's looking to be the worst of the season." Before leaving, Owen approached her at the counter. "Will you be all right at Mrs. Goodwin's?" "Of course," Catherine assured him. "The house is sturdy and we have plenty of firewood." Owen hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I was going to save this for your birthday. Peterson mentioned it was coming up, but I think now might be better." He placed a small package wrapped in brown paper on the counter. "Just a small token. For the lady who makes the best apple pies in the territory." Before Catherine could respond, he'd grabbed the supplies and was gone, back out into the swirling snow. Later that night, safe in her room with the storm howling outside, Catherine carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small leather-bound volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson, published just the previous year. A pressed wildflower marked a page, and Catherine opened to it, reading, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Catherine traced the words with her fingertip, something warm and unfamiliar expanding in her chest. Hope. Such a dangerous, beautiful thing. The blizzard lasted 3 days, burying the town in snowdrifts taller than a man. When it finally cleared, the news came that Owen and his brother had been stranded at the widow Murray's place, keeping the family safe and warm throughout the ordeal. When Owen finally returned to town a week later, Katherine was arranging a display of canned goods. The bell above the door jangled, and she looked up to see him stomping snow from his boots, his face thinner, but his smile just as warm. "Miss Cole," he greeted her, "store's looking well stocked despite the storm." "Mr. Lawrence," she returned, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "I'm glad to see you made it back safely." "Takes more than a little snow to keep me down," he joked, though the fatigue in his eyes told of difficult days. "Did you have a chance to look at the book?" Katherine nodded. "It's beautiful, thank you. I've never owned something so fine." Owen's expression softened. "It suits you. Simple on the outside, but full of depth and beauty within." The compliment made Katherine blush, unused to such words. Before she could respond, Mr. Peterson emerged from the storeroom. "Lawrence, good to see you in one piece. Heard you saved the Murray children." Owen shrugged modestly. "Just did what anyone would do." As the men discussed the aftermath of the storm, Katherine found herself studying Owen the way his hands gestured as he spoke. The crow's feet that deepened when he smiled, the quiet confidence in his posture. Something was changing inside her, something that both thrilled and terrified her. February brought milder weather and the town's annual Valentine's Day dance. Katherine had no intention of attending until Emma Peterson, now firmly attached to Katherine as an older sister figure, begged her to come. "Please, Miss Cole," the girl pleaded. "Father says I can go for 2 hours if you'll chaperone me. Billy Thompson asked if he could dance with me." Katherine couldn't resist the girl's excitement. "Very well, but only for 2 hours. And you'll stay where I can see you." The town hall was decorated with paper hearts and ribbon streamers for the occasion. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes as couples twirled across the wooden floor. Katherine sat against the wall, watching Emma's careful steps with young Billy Thompson, both children blushing furiously. "Not dancing?" Katherine looked up to find Owen standing beside her chair holding 2 cups of punch. "I'm here as a chaperone," she explained, accepting the offered drink. Owen sat in the empty chair beside her. "Ah, guarding young hearts. Noble work." They watched the dancers in companionable silence for a while. Katherine was acutely aware of Owen's presence beside her, the clean scent of soap, and the faint smell of horses that seemed to follow all ranchers. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly, "for that day in the store, with those men." Owen's expression darkened slightly at the memory. "No thanks needed. Men like that give the rest of us a bad name." Katherine studied her cup, gathering courage. "They weren't wrong, though, about the scars. They were put there deliberately." Owen turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. "Katherine, you don't have to explain anything to me." "I know," she said quietly, "but perhaps I want to, at least a little." Owen waited patiently as she collected her thoughts. "I was married," she finally said, the words feeling strange on her tongue after months of silence. "His name was Thomas. He was charming at first until we were married. Then he changed." Owen's hand tightened on his cup, but he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "3 years," Katherine said. "It took me 3 years to find the courage to leave. After the last time, when he—" She touched the scar on her jaw unconsciously. "I knew the next time would kill me." "And you ran," Owen said softly. Katherine nodded. "As far as my savings would take me. I picked Redemption Springs because of the name. Foolish, perhaps." "Not foolish," Owen contradicted gently. "Hopeful." The band started a slower tune, a waltz that had couples moving in graceful circles. "Would you dance with me, Katherine?" Owen asked, his voice low. "Just one dance." Katherine hesitated. "I don't know if I remember how." "I'll remind you," he promised, standing and offering his hand. After checking that Emma was still safely dancing with Billy under the watchful eye of the schoolteacher, Katherine placed her hand in Owen's and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was light, respectful, nothing like the bruising grip Thomas had used when forcing her to dance at social functions. Owen guided her gently, his steps sure and unhurried. "See?" he murmured. "Your body remembers." As they moved together, Katherine felt something inside her unlocking, a door long sealed beginning to crack open. When Owen smiled down at her, she found herself smiling back, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You should do that more often," he said. "It transforms your face." The dance ended too soon, and Katherine reluctantly stepped back. "Thank you." "The pleasure was mine," Owen replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary, before he escorted her back to her seat. The evening ended with Emma breathlessly recounting every detail of her dances with Billy Thompson as Katherine walked her home. But Katherine's thoughts were filled with the warmth of Owen's hand against hers, the steady rhythm of his steps, and the feeling that something important had shifted between them. March brought the first signs of spring to Redemption Springs. The snow began to melt, revealing mud and the first tentative green shoots. Business at the store picked up as ranchers prepared for calving season, and townspeople restocked after the long winter. Katherine had settled into a comfortable routine, but the peace she'd found was shattered one rainy afternoon when a stranger walked into Peterson's store. She was helping a customer find fabric for a new dress when the bell jangled. Looking up, Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. Standing in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor, was Malcolm Reed, Thomas's closest friend and drinking companion. "Well, well," Reed drawled, his thin face twisting in a cruel smile. "If it isn't the runaway bride." Katherine's customer, sensing tension, quickly paid for her purchases and hurried out. Mr. Peterson was at the bank, leaving Katherine alone with Reed. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Reed sauntered closer, his boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. "Just passing through, looking for work." Imagine my surprise when I heard talk of a pretty store clerk with a scarred face. His eyes traced the mark on her jaw. "Thomas's handiwork is distinctive, isn't it?" Katherine fought the urge to back away. "Thomas has no claim on me anymore. I suggest you leave town." Reed laughed, an ugly sound. "That's not how Thomas sees it. He's been searching for you for months. Offers a nice reward, too, for information on his beloved wife's whereabouts." Cold dread settled in Katherine's chest. "Are you going to tell him?" Reed pretended to consider this, leaning against the counter. "Might depend on how nice you are to an old friend. I could use a place to stay. Some money for my trouble." "I have nothing to give you," Katherine said flatly. "Don't you?" Reed's eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Thomas always said you had your uses, despite your disobedience." Before Katherine could respond, the door opened again, and Owen stepped in, shaking rain from his hat. He paused, taking in the scene Katherine's pale face, Reed's threatening posture. "Everything all right, Miss Cole?" he asked, moving to stand beside the counter. Reed straightened, assessing the newcomer with narrow eyes. "Just catching up with an old friend. Ain't that right, Katherine?" Katherine swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed was just leaving." Owen's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "Seems like the lady wants you to go." Reed sneered. "And who might you be? Her new protector?" "Owen Lawrence," he replied simply, "and I think you should move along." The two men stared each other down for a long moment before Reed shrugged and backed toward the door. "Think about what I said, Katherine," he called. "I'll be at the boarding house if you change your mind. Otherwise, I might have to send a telegram east." After he'd gone, Katherine gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. Owen moved closer, concern etched on his face. Who was that? He asked. Someone from my past, Katherine answered, her voice barely audible. Someone who knows my husband. Owen's expression darkened at the word husband. The man who hurt you. Katherine nodded, feeling the carefully constructed piece of her new life crumbling around her. If he tells Thomas where I am? He won't, Owen said firmly. I'll make sure of it. Katherine looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. How? Leave that to me, Owen replied. Do you trust me, Katherine? The question hung in the air between them. Did she trust him? This man she'd known for less than a year, whose kindness still sometimes felt foreign and suspect? Yes, she said finally, surprising herself with the truth of it. I do. Owen nodded once. Good. Lock the door after I leave. I'll be back before closing time. Katherine watched him go, rain plastering his shirt to his broad shoulders as he strode purposefully down the street toward the saloon. She did as he asked, turning the sign to closed and securing the door. The afternoon crawled by in agonizing slowness. Katherine tried to busy herself with inventory, but her mind kept returning to Reed's threats and what they meant. If Thomas found her, he would drag her back to Missouri, back to the hell she'd escaped. And this time, he would make sure she never left again. As promised, Owen returned just before the store's usual closing time. His knuckles were raw, but his expression was calm as Katherine let him in. It's handled, he said simply. Reed's leaving on tomorrow morning's stage. He won't be contacting anyone about you. Katherine stared at him in disbelief. How did you convince him? A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. Let's just say I made him understand that the consequences of staying or sending that telegram would be considerably more unpleasant than whatever reward your husband offered. You threatened him, Katherine stated, not a question. I persuaded him, Owen corrected, with some financial incentive to help his journey along. Katherine felt a complex mixture of relief, gratitude, and concern. You paid him? Less than it would cost me to have him arrested for attempted extortion, Owen replied, and worth every penny to see him gone. Katherine sank onto a nearby stool, the tension leaving her body in a rush that left her trembling. I don't know how to thank you. Owen knelt in front of her, careful not to touch her but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. You don't need to thank me, but Katherine, this may not be the end of it. If he found you? Others might too, she finished the thought. I know. You could leave, Owen suggested, though his voice tightened at the words. Start fresh somewhere else. Katherine considered this. She could run again, find another town, another job, another life. But the thought filled her with weariness rather than hope. No, she said finally. I'm tired of running. Redemption Springs is my home now. Something like pride flickered in Owen's eyes. Then stay and face whatever comes. But know that you won't face it alone. The simple promise, offered without expectation or demand, broke something open inside Katherine. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. Owen remained where he was, letting her cry without trying to hush or comfort her, understanding somehow that these tears were necessary, cleansing. When she finally collected herself, Owen stood and offered his handkerchief. Feel better? Katherine nodded, wiping her eyes. Lighter, at least. Good, he said. Now, I'd like to walk you to Mrs. Goodwin's and make sure you get settled for the night, if you're amenable. I am, Katherine agreed, gathering her things and locking up the store. They walked in silence through the rain-washed streets, the setting sun breaking through clouds to cast the town in golden light. At the boarding house steps, Katherine turned to face Owen. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for today, but for everything. Owen studied her face for a moment, then reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently touched the scar on her jaw, his fingers whisper-light. "These marks," he said softly, "they tell me you're a survivor, that you have strength beyond measure. There's no shame in them." Katherine held perfectly still under his touch, heart hammering in her chest. "Some people see only damage. Some people are blind to what matters," Owen countered. He let his hand fall away. "Good night, Katherine. Sleep well." As spring turned the hills green and brought wildflowers to the Wyoming prairie, Katherine found herself looking forward to Owen's visits to the store with increasing anticipation. Their conversations had grown deeper, touching on hopes and dreams, on books and ideas, on the changing world around them. In April, Owen invited her to Sunday dinner at the Double L Ranch. "Nothing formal," he assured her. "Just Liam and me, and our housekeeper Mrs. Hendricks makes a roast that would make angels weep." Katherine accepted with only slight hesitation. The ride to the ranch was her first journey outside town since her arrival the previous summer. Owen drove the wagon himself, pointing out landmarks and telling stories of the early days when he and Liam had first claimed the land. The Double L sprawled across a verdant valley, neat fences enclosing grazing cattle, a large barn standing beside a two-story house built of sturdy logs and river stone. It was impressive without being ostentatious, clearly the result of years of hard work. "Owen, this is beautiful," Katherine said as they approached. He smiled, pleased by her approval. "It's home. Took 8 years to build it up to what you see. Started with just a one-room cabin and 30 head of cattle. You must be very proud." "Of some things," he agreed. "Though there's always more to do, more to improve." The afternoon passed pleasantly. Liam Lawrence proved to be as amiable as his brother, though quieter, with a dry wit that had Katherine laughing more than once. Mrs. Hendricks, a widow in her 50s who had been with the brothers for years, served a meal that lived up to Owen's praise. After dinner, Owen showed Katherine around the property, including the garden he was cultivating behind the house. "My mother loved flowers," he explained, showing her the rose bushes just beginning to bud. "I try to keep something growing in her memory." The simple sentiment touched Katherine deeply. "She would be proud of what you've built here." Owen gazed at the land spreading before them, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the mountains purple against the horizon. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if we've done enough, Liam and me. Our father had grand visions for this place." "And you don't?" Katherine asked. Owen considered this. "Different ones, perhaps. Father wanted the biggest spread in the territory. I just want a place that feels right, a place worth coming home to." The look he gave her made Katherine's heart skip a beat. There was a question in his eyes, one not yet voiced but increasingly present in their interactions. As they prepared to return to town, Owen helped Katherine into the wagon with careful hands. "I'd like to do this again," he said. "Have you out to the ranch. Perhaps next time I could show you the north pasture. The wildflowers there are just starting to bloom." "I'd like that," Katherine replied, and found she truly meant it. May brought warmer weather and increasing tension. Reed had left town as promised, but his appearance had shaken Katherine's sense of security. Each time the stage arrived, she found herself watching anxiously, fearing to see Thomas step down, come to reclaim what he considered his property. Owen noticed her unease. "You're jumping at shadows," he observed gently one evening as they sat on Mrs. Goodwin's porch after dinner. The older woman had finally relented to allowing Katherine gentleman callers, though she insisted on regular checks through the window. "I can't help it," Katherine admitted. "I know Thomas. He doesn't let go of things easily, especially things he considers his." "You're not a thing," Owen said firmly. "And legally, he may have less claim than you think." Katherine looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" Owen shifted in his chair. "I've been corresponding with a lawyer in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory has different laws than Missouri regarding marriage and mistreatment. You consulted a lawyer? About my situation? Katherine wasn't sure whether to be touched or alarmed by his interference. I hope I haven't overstepped, Owen said quickly. But knowledge is power, Katherine, and from what the lawyer says, you have grounds for divorce that would be recognized here, regardless of Missouri's laws. The word divorce hung in the air between them. It wasn't something respectable women discussed, let alone pursued. Yet the possibility of being truly free of Thomas, legally as well as physically, made Katherine's heart race. It would be difficult, she said finally. Scandalous, even in a frontier town. Yes, Owen agreed. But possible. Worth considering, perhaps, if it would help you feel secure. Katherine studied him, this man who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness and lack of judgment. Why do you care so much, Owen? About what happens to me? Owen met her gaze steadily. I think you know why. The simple statement, heavy with unspoken feeling, made Katherine's breath catch. Before she could respond, Mrs. Goodwin appeared at the door, announcing that it was getting late, and propriety demanded their evening end. As Owen bid her good night, Katherine found herself wishing for more time, more words, more of whatever was growing between them. June brought a wave of heat that had the townsfolk seeking shade and complaining good-naturedly about the weather they'd so desperately wished for during the long winter. Katherine continued her work at the store, which now included training Emma Peterson in basic bookkeeping as the girl showed a natural aptitude for numbers. One sweltering afternoon, as Katherine was closing up the store, the door opened to admit Sheriff Miller, his expression grave beneath his gray mustache. Miss Cole, he said, removing his hat. Got a telegram today I think you should know about. Katherine's heart sank as he handed her the yellow paper. It was brief and direct. Sheriff Miller stopped seeking information on Katherine Blackburn nee Cole. Stop reward offered for safe return to husband Thomas Blackburn of Springfield, Missouri. Stop. Katherine's hands trembled as she returned the telegram to the sheriff. I see. Miller studied her thoughtfully. Lawrence mentioned you might have some trouble from back east. This, the trouble he was referring to? Katherine nodded mutely. Want to tell me about it? The sheriff asked, not unkindly. Taking a deep breath, Katherine did exactly that. She spoke plainly about her marriage, about Thomas's escalating violence, about her escape, and fear of being forced to return. As she spoke, she found the words came easier than expected, the shame that had kept her silent gradually replaced by a steady anger. Sheriff Miller listened without interruption, his weathered face impassive. When she finished, he nodded once. Appreciate your honesty, Miss Cole. For what it's worth, I've seen your type of situation before. No woman runs hundreds of miles without good reason. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll be sending a reply to this telegram, but it won't be the one this Thomas Blackburn is hoping for. Relief washed through Katherine. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Miller warned. Men like your husband, they don't usually give up easy. But you've got friends in Redemption Springs now. Remember that. After the sheriff left, Katherine locked the store and walked slowly toward Mrs. Goodwin's, deep in thought. The telegram confirmed her worst fears. Thomas was actively searching for her. Yet the sheriff's response had given her hope. Perhaps here, surrounded by people who knew her as she was now, she could stand her ground. She was so preoccupied that she didn't notice Owen until he called her name. He was striding toward her from the direction of the telegraph office, concern etched on his features. Miller told me about the telegram, he said without preamble. Are you all right? Katherine nodded. Better than I expected to be, actually. The sheriff was understanding. Most decent folk would be, Owen replied. Katherine, this changes things. If your husband knows you're here? He doesn't. Not yet. She interrupted. He's just searching. And I've decided something, Owen. I'm not running again. Owen studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes. All right, but we need to be prepared, in case he comes. We? Katherine raised an eyebrow. Yes, we, Owen confirmed firmly. You're not alone in this. Something warm unfurled in Katherine's chest at his words, at the easy way he included himself in her troubles. In that moment, she made a decision that had been forming gradually over months. Owen, she said quietly, you mentioned a lawyer in Cheyenne. About a divorce. Owen nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I did. I'd like you to write to him again. Ask what would be necessary to proceed. A slow smile spread across Owen's face, reaching his eyes and crinkling the corners. I'll send the letter tonight. The following weeks were busy ones. Katherine continued working at the store while corresponding with the lawyer in Cheyenne. The process would be complicated but not impossible. She would need to establish residency in Wyoming Territory, already accomplished, file a petition citing cruelty, and likely face a court appearance. It's the court appearance that worries me, she confided to Owen as they walked along the river one Sunday afternoon in late June. What if Thomas contests it? What if he comes here? Owen's jaw tightened. Then he'll find that you're not without protection. Katherine stopped walking to face him directly. Owen, I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me. Especially not you. Owen's eyes softened as they met hers. Katherine Cole, when will you understand that you're worth protecting? Worth fighting for? The simple sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. I'm beginning to, she admitted. They stood close, the rushing river beside them and the summer sun warm on their shoulders. Owen reached up slowly, giving her time to move away as always, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. May I kiss you, Katherine? He asked, his voice low. Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Owen leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a gentle, questioning touch that held none of the demanding possession she'd known before. It was a kiss that asked rather than took, offered rather than claimed. When they parted, Katherine's heart was racing, but not from fear. Owen rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his eyes closed. I've wanted to do that for months, he confessed. Katherine smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'm glad you waited until I was ready. They continued their walk, hands linked between them, talking of small things and large ones, of the future and its possibilities. For the first time in years, Katherine allowed herself to hope without reservation, to imagine a life free from fear. But the peace was not to last. Thomas Blackburn arrived in Redemption Springs on the first Tuesday in July, stepping down from the afternoon stage with murder in his eyes and a telegram in his pocket. Malcolm Reed had finally sent word, unable to resist the promised reward. Katherine was alone in the store when Thomas walked in, the bell above the door announcing his arrival like a death knell. She looked up from the ledger she was updating and felt the blood drain from her face. He hadn't changed much in the year since she'd fled, still handsome in a sharp-featured way, still immaculately dressed in a suit that spoke of money and position. Only his eyes betrayed the cruelty beneath the polished exterior. "Hello, wife," he said, his voice deceptively soft as he closed the door behind him. "You've led me on quite a chase." Katherine straightened her spine, refusing to cower though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm not your wife anymore, Thomas. Not in any way that matters." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The law disagrees. You're my property, Katherine, to do with as I please, and I'm taking you home." "No," Katherine said simply. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Thomas's expression darkened as he stepped closer. "You always were stubborn. I see I'll need to remind you of your place." He moved with the speed that had always caught her off guard, grabbing her arm and wrenching it painfully. Katherine refused to cry out, meeting his gaze defiantly. You can hurt me, she said evenly, but I still won't go with you. This isn't Missouri, Thomas. People know me here. They'll ask questions if I disappear. Thomas laughed, a cold sound that raised goosebumps on her arms. Questions? About a man taking his rightful wife home? I think not. His grip tightened. Though I might need to teach you some manners first. You seem to have forgotten your lessons. Katherine knew what would come next. The backhand across the face, the fist to the ribs, the calculated violence designed to break her will without leaving marks that would show in public. She braced herself, determined not to give him the satisfaction of her fear. The blow never came. The door opened with a bang, and Thomas whirled to face the interruption, still gripping Katherine's arm. Sheriff Miller stood in the doorway, hand resting on his holstered pistol. Everything all right, Miss Cole? No, Katherine answered clearly. This man is Thomas Blackburn. He's attempting to force me to return to Missouri with him. Thomas's charm slipped into place like a well-worn mask. Sheriff, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply reclaiming my wife, who ran away after a small domestic disagreement. Miller's eyes flicked to where Thomas still gripped Katherine's arm, then to the fading bruises on her wrist. Looks like more than a small disagreement to me. His voice hardened. Let go of the lady, Blackburn. For a moment, Katherine thought Thomas would refuse. Then, with exaggerated courtesy, he released her arm and stepped back. This is a private matter, Sheriff, Thomas insisted, between a man and his wife. Not in my town. It ain't, Miller replied. Miss Cole has filed for divorce in the Wyoming Territorial courts. Until that's resolved, you'd be wise to keep your distance. Thomas's facade cracked, anger flashing in his eyes. Filed for divorce? On what grounds? Cruelty, Katherine answered steadily. And abandonment, since I've been gone for over a year. Thomas turned on her, fury contorting his handsome features. You think you can humiliate me like this? I'll see you in the gutter before I allow it. That's enough, Miller interrupted. Mr. Blackburn, I suggest you get a room at the hotel and cool down. Any trouble, and I'll have you in a cell faster than you can blink. Thomas straightened his jacket, his composure returning like a mask sliding back into place. This isn't over, Katherine, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. After he left, with the sheriff following to ensure he went directly to the hotel, Katherine sank onto a stool, her legs suddenly weak. He'd found her. After all this time, all the precautions, Thomas had found her. And he wouldn't leave without what he considered his property, her. When Owen arrived at the store an hour later, having heard the news from Miller, he found Katherine calmly serving customers as if nothing had happened. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. He waited until the last customer left before approaching the counter. Katherine, he began. He's staying at the hotel, she said without preamble. Sheriff Miller warned him off, but we both know Thomas won't be deterred. Owen nodded, unsurprised by her directness. Miller told me, Katherine, you shouldn't be alone until this is resolved. I'm not leaving town, she said firmly. I wasn't suggesting that, Owen replied, but perhaps you could stay with the Petersons or the Reverend's family. Katherine considered this, then shook her head. No, I won't bring danger to their doors. This is between Thomas and me. And me, Owen added quietly. Katherine looked up sharply. No, Owen, I don't want you involved in this. I'm already involved, he countered, his voice gentle but firm. Have been since that first day I saw you working here, trying so hard to be invisible while keeping your head high. Something in his words, in the unwavering support they offered, broke through Katherine's careful composure. I'm scared, Owen, she admitted, not just of Thomas, but of what he might do to anyone who stands with me. Owen moved around the counter to stand before her, close but not touching. Fear is natural. Acting despite it is courage. And you, Katherine Cole, are the most courageous person I know." He held out his hand, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. After a moment's hesitation, Katherine placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "We'll face this together," Owen promised. "All of us, me, Liam, Sheriff Miller, even old Peterson. You're not alone anymore." The next day dawned clear and hot, the July sun beating down on Redemption Springs with merciless intensity. Katherine arrived at the store early, having spent a restless night at Mrs. Goodwin's. The older woman, informed of the situation, had set up a cot in her own room so Katherine wouldn't be alone. The morning passed without incident, though Katherine's nerves were stretched tight with every jangle of the bell above the door. By noon, she had convinced herself that perhaps Thomas had left town, intimidated by the sheriff's warning. That hope died when he walked into the store just after the lunch hour, impeccably dressed despite the heat, his smile coldly confident. "Katherine," he greeted her, "I've come to apologize for yesterday's unpleasantness." Katherine didn't trust the placid expression or the conciliatory tone. Thomas never apologized unless he was setting a trap. "Mr. Peterson is in the storeroom," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "The sheriff suggested I not speak with you alone." Thomas's smile didn't waver. "Very prudent. But I assure you I mean no harm. I've had time to consider the situation, and I realize I handled our reunion poorly." Katherine said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I've booked passage back to Missouri on tomorrow's stage," Thomas continued. "I hope you'll reconsider and join me, but I won't force the issue." Katherine's surprise must have shown on her face, for Thomas chuckled. "Did you think me a complete monster? You're my wife, Katherine. I want you home, but I can see that dragging you back unwilling would only cause more problems." He spread his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm willing to start fresh, to make amends for past misunderstandings." Katherine knew this tactic well, the false contrition, the promises that would turn to ash the moment they were alone. "I'm filing for divorce, Thomas. There is no fresh start for us." A flicker of anger crossed his face before the mask slipped back into place. "I understand you feel that way now. But consider your position carefully. A divorced woman has few prospects, even in the West, and the process can be unpleasant. Details of our private life, aired in public." The threat was clear. He would make the divorce as humiliating as possible, would paint her as unstable, immoral, unworthy of sympathy. "I'm not afraid of the truth anymore," Katherine replied steadily. Thomas studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. "You've changed," he observed, "grown bolder. I wonder what or who is responsible for that." Before Katherine could respond, the store door opened again, and Owen stepped inside. He nodded to Katherine before turning his attention to Thomas. "Mr. Blackburn?" he greeted the other man coolly. "I believe Sheriff Miller advised against harassing Miss Cole." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he assessed Owen, the broad shoulders, the quiet confidence, the protective stance. "Ah," he said softly. "I see the situation more clearly now." Owen didn't rise to the bait. "Katherine, Peterson sent me to help with those feed sacks in the back. When you're free." The message was clear. He was offering an escape if she needed it. Katherine shook her head slightly. This confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it now. "Mr. Lawrence, I presume?" Thomas asked. "My wife seems to have formed quite an attachment to you." "Former wife," Owen corrected mildly. "As I understand it, the law here considers abandonment for over a year grounds for dissolution of marriage." Thomas's pleasant facade slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "The law can be interpreted many ways, and Katherine didn't leave willingly. She fled after an emotional episode. She's not well, you see." Katherine flinched at the familiar tactic. How many times had Thomas explained away her bruises by suggesting she was unstable, prone to fits of hysteria or self-harm? Strange, Owen replied, his voice hardening. She seems perfectly well to me. Sound of mind and strong of character. Thomas's laugh was sharp. You've been deceived, Lawrence. Katherine is quite skilled at manipulation. Ask her to show you the scars on her back self-inflicted during one of her episodes. She needed constant supervision in Missouri. Katherine's hands clenched at the blatant lie. The scars on her back had come from Thomas's belt, a punishment for speaking to a male neighbor without permission. That's not true, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. And you know it. Thomas turned to her, eyes cold. Now, dear, we agreed with the doctor that acknowledging your condition was the first step to recovery. Enough, Owen interrupted, stepping closer. You're not welcome here, Blackburn. Leave now, or I'll call the sheriff. Thomas's smile was reptilian. Defending her honor? How quaint. But I wonder if you'll feel the same when you learn what sort of woman you're championing. He turned back to Katherine. Show him, wife. Show him the marks of your madness. Something snapped inside Katherine at the familiar tactic, the gaslighting designed to make her doubt her own mind, her own memories. Without thinking, she stepped out from behind the counter and began unbuttoning the high collar of her dress. Both men watched in stunned silence as she turned and pulled the fabric down just far enough to reveal her upper back, crisscrossed with thin white scars. Thomas gave me these, she said clearly, facing her husband again, for speaking to Mr. Jameson about his wife's illness, for burning the toast at breakfast, for not smiling enough at his business dinner. With each example, her voice grew stronger. This is the truth he doesn't want told in court. This is why he's here, not to reclaim me, but to silence me. Thomas's face contorted with rage, the mask of civility finally dropping completely. You ungrateful whore, he hissed, stepping toward her with raised hand. After everything I gave you. His advance was halted by Owen's hand on his shoulder, iron hard. That's far enough. Thomas spun, his fist connecting with Owen's jaw in a sudden explosion of violence. Owen staggered back, more from surprise than the force of the blow. Thomas pressed his advantage, charging forward like a bull. But Owen sidestepped, letting the other man's momentum carry him into a display of canned goods that crashed to the floor. Katherine pressed herself against the counter, watching in horror as the men grappled. Thomas fought with the viciousness of a cornered animal, landing several sharp blows, but Owen's rancher's strength and cool head gave him the advantage. Within moments, he had Thomas pinned against the wall, forearm across his throat. That's enough, Owen said, his voice deadly quiet. You're leaving town, Blackburn. Today. And if you ever come near Katherine again, what I do to you will make your treatment of her look gentle. The store door banged open, and Sheriff Miller rushed in, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene with a practiced eye, the scattered merchandise. Owen restraining a red-faced Thomas, Katherine standing rigidly by the counter. What's going on here? He demanded. Mr. Blackburn was just leaving Redemption Springs, Owen said, slowly releasing his hold. Permanently. Thomas straightened his rumpled jacket, his eyes burning with hatred. This man attacked me, Sheriff. I want him arrested. Miller looked to Katherine. That true, Miss Cole? No, she said firmly. Thomas threatened me and tried to strike me. Mr. Lawrence intervened. Miller nodded, unsurprised. Mr. Blackburn, I'm escorting you to the stage depot. There's one leaving for Cheyenne in an hour. I suggest you be on it. You can't force me to leave town, Thomas protested. I have rights. Actually, I can, Miller corrected. As sheriff, I have the authority to remove individuals I deem a threat to public safety. Now, we can do this dignified-like, or I can put you in a cell until the stage arrives. Your choice. Thomas's gaze shifted between the three faces before him, calculating his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in temporary defeat. "This isn't over," he said to Katherine, his voice low. "A piece of paper from some territorial judge won't end our marriage in the eyes of God or decent society. You belong to me." "No," Katherine replied steadily. "I don't. I never did." As Sheriff Miller led Thomas away, Katherine felt a curious lightness, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally been lifted. She turned to Owen, who was gingerly touching his jaw where a bruise was already forming. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Owen shook his head. "Just my pride. Your husband has a surprisingly good right hook for a city man." "Ex-husband," Katherine corrected, echoing his earlier words, and was rewarded with Owen's slow smile. "Ex-husband," he agreed, "though there's still the legal process to complete." Katherine nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained away. "Do you think he'll really leave? Or will he try again?" Owen considered this. "Men like Thomas don't give up easily. But he knows now that you're not alone, that taking you won't be simple." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "We'll be watchful, but don't let fear of him steal your future, Katherine." The tenderness in his voice made tears spring to her eyes. "I won't," she promised. "Not anymore." Owen's expression grew serious. "Katherine, I need to say something, and I hope it's not too soon." He took a deep breath. "I love you. Not despite your scars or your past, but including them. They're part of what made you the woman standing before me, brave, kind, resilient." Katherine's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. No man had ever spoken to her like this, with such honest emotion and respect. "Owen," she began, but was interrupted by Mr. Peterson bursting in from the storeroom, belatedly responding to the commotion. "What in tarnation happened here?" he demanded, surveying the scattered merchandise. "Looks like a cyclone hit." Owen released Katherine's hands reluctantly. "Sorry about the mess, Peterson. I'll help clean it up." As they restored order to the store, Katherine found herself watching Owen, the careful way he stacked cans, the gentle humor as he teased Peterson about his organization system, the occasional glance he sent her way, full of unspoken feeling. She hadn't answered his declaration, but there would be time for that. Time to find the right words to express what was growing in her heart, what had been growing since that first dance at the Valentine's celebration. Time to build something new and whole from the broken pieces of her past. That evening, Katherine sat on Mrs. Goodwin's porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sheriff Miller had confirmed that Thomas had boarded the stage to Cheyenne, though he'd made it clear he would return for the divorce proceedings. Owen joined her as dusk deepened, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "Beautiful evening," he observed. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "Peaceful." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the chirping of crickets a gentle soundtrack to their thoughts. "I meant what I said earlier," Owen said finally, "in the store. But I understand if it's too soon, if you need time." Katherine turned to study his profile in the fading light. This good man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, who had never pushed or demanded or made her feel less than whole. "It's not too soon," she said softly. "But I want to be free, truly free, before I make any promises." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The divorce?" "Yes," Katherine confirmed. "I need to finish this chapter before beginning another. But Owen..." She reached out, taking his hand. "I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after what happened with Thomas." Owen's fingers tightened around hers. "Then I'll wait. However long it takes." The divorce proceedings were set for September, in the territorial court in Cheyenne. As the weeks passed, Katherine prepared for the ordeal with Owen's steady support. The lawyer he'd found was cautiously optimistic about her case, particularly with Sheriff Miller and several townspeople willing to testify about Thomas's behavior during his brief visit. August brought the hottest days of the year, the sun baking the prairie to a golden brown. Katherine continued working at the store, saving every penny for the journey to Cheyenne and the legal fees. Owen and Liam offered to cover the costs, but Katherine insisted on paying her own way. "This is my fight," she explained. "I need to win it myself." Owen respected her decision, though he insisted on accompanying her to Cheyenne when the time came. "Not to fight your battles," he clarified, "but to stand beside you while you fight them." It was during these weeks that Katherine began to truly open up about her past, not just the violence of her marriage, but the happier memories before it. She told Owen about growing up in a small Missouri town, about her parents who had died of fever when she was 16, about the aunt who had pushed her into marriage with Thomas at 18, seeing it as her best prospect. In turn, Owen shared stories of his childhood on the frontier, of losing his parents to a Sioux raid when he was 20, of building the ranch with Liam through years of hard work and sacrifice. "We're both orphans," Katherine observed one evening as they walked along the river. "Both forced to find our own way too young." Owen nodded. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." As September approached, Katherine found herself growing stronger, more certain of her path. The fear of Thomas still lingered, but it no longer controlled her actions or thoughts. The nightmares that had plagued her since her escape grew less frequent, replaced by dreams of wide-open spaces and possibilities. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days by stagecoach. Owen sat beside Katherine throughout, a solid presence that anchored her when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her resolve. Sheriff Miller traveled with them, both as a witness and to ensure Thomas caused no trouble. Cheyenne was larger and more developed than Redemption Springs, with brick buildings and boardwalks crowded with people from all walks of life. The territorial court occupied a stately building on the main street, its imposing facade making Katherine's stomach clench with nervousness. "Remember," Owen said quietly as they approached, "you're telling the truth. That's all you need to do." Thomas was already there, waiting on the courthouse steps with a sharp-faced lawyer at his side. He looked thinner than in Redemption Springs, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose, but his eyes still held the cold calculation that had always chilled Katherine's blood. The hearing was held in the judge's chambers rather than the open courtroom, a small mercy for which Katherine was grateful. Judge Henry Wilson was a severe-looking man with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see through pretense. The proceedings began with formalities: names, dates, legal grounds. Thomas's lawyer argued vociferously that Katherine had abandoned the marriage without cause, that she was mentally unstable, that she should be returned to her husband's custody rather than granted a divorce. When Katherine's turn came to speak, she rose on shaky legs, conscious of Thomas's gaze boring into her back. "Your Honor," she began, her voice barely audible. "Speak up, Mrs. Blackburn," Judge Wilson instructed, not unkindly. Katherine took a deep breath and began again. "Your Honor, I left my husband because I feared for my life." Slowly, methodically, she described the progression of her marriage, the initial happiness that had quickly soured, the first slap that had come just weeks after the wedding, the escalating violence that had culminated in the beating that had nearly killed her and left the permanent scar on her jaw. She spoke of the isolation Thomas had enforced, cutting her off from friends and neighbors who might have helped. She described how he had convinced the local doctor that her injuries were self-inflicted, the result of female hysteria. Through it all, she kept her voice steady, her gaze fixed on the judge's impassive face. Behind her, she could hear Thomas shifting in his seat, could almost feel his rage building at her public recitation of his private cruelty. When she finished, Judge Wilson asked, "Do you have witnesses to corroborate these claims, Mrs. Blackburn?" Only to the most recent incidents, Katherine replied honestly. Sheriff Miller of Redemption Springs can testify to Mr. Blackburn's behavior when he came to force me to return to Missouri. Miller stepped forward, giving his account of Thomas's threatening behavior and the altercation at the store. Owen followed, describing what he had witnessed and the marks he had seen on Katherine's body. Throughout these testimonies, Thomas sat rigidly, his lawyer occasionally objecting to characterizations, but otherwise letting the statement stand. It was a strategy Katherine recognized: let them talk, then destroy their credibility. When it was Thomas's turn, he rose with practiced dignity, adjusting his cuffs before addressing the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "I regret that this private matter has been brought before the court. My wife is a troubled woman, prone to flights of fancy and self-harm during episodes of hysteria." He produced letters from the doctor in Missouri attesting to Katherine's nervous condition and propensity for injuring herself during fits. He described how he had tried to help her, providing the best medical care available, only to have her flee in a moment of confusion. "I followed her not to punish, but to bring her home for proper treatment," Thomas concluded, his expression a perfect mask of concerned husband. "I asked not for punishment but for the court's help in returning my wife to my care, where she can receive the attention she clearly needs." The performance was masterful, and for a moment, Katherine felt the old doubt creeping in. Had she imagined the violence? Was she truly the unstable one? The feeling was so familiar, so ingrained after years of Thomas's manipulation, that she almost believed it. Then she felt Owen's steady presence beside her, saw the skepticism in Judge Wilson's eyes as he reviewed the letters, and remembered the truth of her own experience. No, she hadn't imagined the belt lashing across her back or the fist breaking her ribs. Those had been real as the scars they had left. After both sides had presented their cases, Judge Wilson called a recess to consider his decision. Katherine waited in a small anteroom with Owen and Sheriff Miller, too nervous to speak. "You did well," Owen told her softly. "Told the truth with dignity." Katherine nodded, unable to find her voice as they waited for judgment on her future. When they were called back, Judge Wilson sat behind his desk, his expression grave. He looked at Katherine for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Blackburn or Miss Cole, as I understand you prefer to be called, I have reviewed the evidence presented today. While your husband's documentation is extensive, I find several troubling inconsistencies." Thomas stiffened beside his lawyer, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Moreover," the judge continued, "I have received a telegram from Springfield, Missouri, in response to my inquiry. It seems the doctor who provided these letters died 6 months ago. Curious that he would be writing detailed assessments from beyond the grave." Thomas's face paled as the judge fixed him with a stern gaze. "Falsifying evidence is a serious offense, Mr. Blackburn. One I could pursue if I were so inclined." He shuffled the papers before him. "However, as this is a civil rather than criminal proceeding, I will limit my ruling to the matter at hand." The room was utterly silent as Judge Wilson continued. "I find sufficient cause to grant the petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. The marriage between Katherine Cole and Thomas Blackburn is hereby dissolved. Miss Cole is restored to her maiden name and released from all marital obligations." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Free. She was free. "Additionally," the judge added, his voice hardening, "I am issuing an order prohibiting Mr. Blackburn from approaching within 100 yards of Miss Cole or attempting to communicate with her in any way. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." Thomas surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't—" "I can and have," Judge Wilson interrupted coldly. "Be grateful I'm not pursuing charges of perjury, Mr. Blackburn. Now, this hearing is concluded." Outside the courthouse, in the bright September sunshine, Katherine stood motionless, still absorbing the reality of the judge's decision. She was no longer Katherine Blackburn, she was Katherine Cole, answerable to no one but herself. "Congratulations," Sheriff Miller said, shaking her hand formally. "Justice was served today." "Thank you for your help," Katherine replied sincerely. After the sheriff excused himself to make arrangements for their return journey, Katherine turned to Owen, who had been quietly watching her. "It's over," she said, wonder in her voice. "Really over?" Owen nodded, his eyes warm with pride. "You did it, Katherine. You fought and won." Impulsively, Katherine stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Owen hesitated only a moment before returning the embrace, holding her gently as if she were something precious. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me, for standing with me." Owen's arms tightened slightly. "Always," he promised. As they broke apart, Katherine caught sight of Thomas watching them from across the street, his face a mask of hatred. For a moment, old fear clutched at her heart. Then she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze steadily until he turned away, disappearing into the crowd. "Do you think he'll abide by the judge's order?" Katherine asked quietly. Owen considered this. "Hard to say. Men like him don't take defeat well, but he knows the consequences now." He offered his arm. "Shall we go? The stage leaves in an hour." Katherine slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, and together they walked away from the courthouse, away from the past, toward whatever future awaited them. The return to Redemption Springs brought a sense of homecoming that Katherine had never expected to feel again after fleeing Missouri. The familiar buildings, the dusty main street, even Mrs. Goodwin's prying eyes, all were welcome sights that spoke of safety and belonging. News of her divorce spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were supportive, though a few of the more traditional townswomen sniffed disapprovingly at the very idea of divorce. Katherine found she cared little for their judgment. She had won her freedom legally and honorably, and that was all that mattered. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine settled back into her routine at the store. But things were different now. She walked with her head higher, spoke more freely, smiled more often. The weight of fear that had pressed on her since her marriage had lifted, leaving room for joy to take root. Her relationship with Owen also changed, growing deeper and more open. They no longer hid their affection, though they maintained the proprieties that frontier society demanded. They attended church together, shared meals with friends, rode out to the Double L Ranch on Sundays to enjoy Mrs. Hendricks's cooking and the peaceful beauty of the land. It was on one such Sunday in late October, with the air crisp and the afternoon sun painting the landscape in golden light, that Owen invited Katherine for a ride to his favorite spot on the ranch. "It's a bit of a climb," he warned as they saddled their horses. "But worth the effort, I promise." Katherine, now comfortable on horseback after months of Owen's patient teaching, followed him up a winding trail that led into the foothills. The path grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses the final stretch. Just as Katherine was beginning to wonder if the view could possibly justify the exertion, they crested the hill and she stopped, breathless with more than the climb. Before them stretched the entire valley, the ranch buildings looking like toys in the distance, the river a silver ribbon winding through golden grassland, the mountains rising purple and majestic on the horizon. "Owen," Katherine breathed, "it's magnificent." He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "Found this spot the first week we claimed the land. Been coming here ever since when I need to think or just breathe." They tied the horses to a nearby juniper and settled on a sun-warmed boulder. Owen produced a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples for an impromptu picnic. As they ate, Catherine found herself studying Owen's profile against the vast sky, the strong lines of his face softened by the gentle expression in his eyes as he gazed out over the land he loved. "You belong here," she observed, "as if you grew from the soil." Owen chuckled. "Sometimes feels that way. Never wanted to be anywhere else, even when times were hard." He turned to look at her, his expression growing serious. "Catherine, I've been wanting to ask you something." Catherine's heart quickened at the tone of his voice. "Yes?" Owen set aside the remains of their simple meal and took her hands in his. "These past months, getting to know you, watching you fight for your freedom, seeing your strength and kindness, it's been the greatest privilege of my life." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know you've only just won your independence, and I wouldn't ask you to give that up. But I'm hoping you might consider sharing your life with mine." Catherine's breath caught as Owen reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She'd want you to have it, I think. Would have approved of your spirit." He held the ring between them, an offer rather than a demand. "Katherine Cole, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not to possess or control you, but to walk beside you, to build something beautiful together?" Tears welled in Catherine's eyes, not from fear or pain, but from a joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. This was nothing like Thomas's calculated proposal, designed to secure a dutiful, malleable wife. This was a request from a man who saw her fully scars, struggles, and all, and loved her for exactly who she was. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Owen, I would be honored." His smile was like the sunrise as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Owen raised her fingers to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I promise," he said solemnly, "to honor your strength, to respect your independence, to treasure your trust for as long as I live." Catherine leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "And I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to share my heart honestly with you, to build our future together day by day." Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the promise of all that lay ahead, a lifetime of moments, challenges overcome together, joys shared, a partnership of equals. When they finally broke apart, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. Owen helped Catherine to her feet, and they stood together, looking out over the land that would be their home. "Beautiful," Catherine murmured, taking in the view. "Yes," Owen agreed, but he wasn't looking at the landscape. His eyes were fixed on her face, seeing beyond the scar on her jaw to the strength and hope that now defined her more than any mark of past pain. They were married on the first day of December in the small white church of Redemption Springs. The town turned out in force for the celebration, the pews filled with people who had become Catherine's friends and supporters over the past year and a half. Catherine wore a simple dress of deep blue silk, purchased with her own savings. She carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers and pine cones, a tribute to the Wyoming land that had given her sanctuary. As she walked down the aisle alone, a scandalous choice that set tongues wagging but felt perfectly right, her eyes were fixed on Owen, standing tall and proud at the altar. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared spoke of a promise unlike any Catherine had known before, one founded on mutual respect, deep affection, and absolute trust. The celebration afterward filled the town hall with laughter and music. Even Mrs. Goodwin unbent enough to claim a dance with the groom, though she still sniffed disapprovingly at some of the more boisterous behavior as the evening wore on. As midnight approached, Owen and Catherine slipped away, boarding a wagon decorated with ribbons and bells by Liam and the ranch hands. They drove through the clear, cold night to the Double L Ranch, where Owen had built an addition to the main house, a suite of rooms that would be their private domain within the larger household. "Welcome home," Owen said softly as he carried Katherine across the threshold, a tradition she had insisted on despite its reminder of her first marriage. This time, the gesture felt like a beginning rather than an ending, a step into light rather than darkness. The rooms were simple but beautiful, furnished with pieces Owen had crafted himself during the autumn evenings: a bed with an intricately carved headboard, a dressing table with a mirror framed in polished juniper, a rocking chair set before the fireplace where a cheerful blaze already welcomed them. Katherine turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "Owen, it's perfect." "Not quite," he replied with a smile, reaching into his pocket. "One more thing." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper, similar to the one that had contained the poetry book months before. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a pattern of wildflowers. "For your new story," Owen explained. "The one that begins today." Katherine ran her fingers over the supple leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Our story," she corrected gently. "Our story," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. That night, Katherine discovered what love could be between a man and woman, not a taking or a using, but a mutual giving, a tender exploration, a deepening of the bond they had forged through months of friendship and respect. Owen's touches were gentle, his patience infinite as they learned each other in this new way. When he traced the scars on her back, Katherine tensed momentarily, old shame threatening to surface. But Owen's lips followed his fingers, kissing each mark with reverence. "They tell a story I'll honor forever," he murmured against her skin. "The story of your courage, your survival, your triumph." In that moment, Katherine felt the last shadows of Thomas Blackburn's cruelty recede. The scars remained, would always remain, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of the map that had led her here, to this man, this place, this life she had chosen freely. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The Double L Ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Lawrence brothers and Katherine, whose head for figures proved as valuable in ranch management as it had in the general store. They expanded their herds, improved their breeding stock, and became one of the most successful operations in the county. Katherine never lost her independence, maintaining her own pursuits and interests alongside her role as Owen's wife. She continued to help with the books at Peterson's store one day a week, and eventually helped establish the town's first proper library, contributing many of the initial volumes herself. In the spring of 1878, their first child was born, a daughter they named Eleanor, after Owen's mother. She arrived with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world, and from the first moment, it was clear she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's steady strength. As Katherine held her daughter for the first time, Owen sitting beside them on the bed, with tears shining in his eyes, she felt a sense of completion she had never imagined possible. This was what Thomas had nearly stolen from her, not just physical safety, but the possibility of true happiness, of creating a family built on love rather than fear. 2 years later, their son James joined the family, followed by another daughter, Sarah, in 1882. The Lawrence children grew up wild and free on the ranch, riding almost before they could walk, learning the rhythms of the land and the seasons, surrounded by the steady love of their parents and the extended family of ranch hands and neighbors. Katherine's scars faded with time but never disappeared completely. Occasionally, one of the children would ask about the mark on her jaw or glimpse the thin lines on her back while she was bathing them. She never lied but told the truth in ways appropriate to their ages, that sometimes people hurt each other, that she had once been hurt by someone who should have cared for her, but that she had found healing and happiness. Thomas Blackburn never returned to Redemption Springs. They heard, through occasional gossip that reached even the frontier, that he had remarried and moved to San Francisco, where his business ventures failed and his new wife left him after less than a year. The news brought Katherine no pleasure, only a quiet relief that he had faded from her life so completely. On their 20th anniversary, Owen took Katherine back to the hilltop where he had proposed. The climb was harder now, their bodies bearing the evidence of years of hard work and childbearing. But the view was just as spectacular. The ranch sprawled below them, now with additional buildings and fenced pastures, evidence of their success and vision. They sat on the same sun-warmed boulder, gray now in Owen's hair and fine lines around Katherine's eyes, but their hands still fit together perfectly as they gazed out over the life they had built. "Any regrets?" Owen asked, a question he posed every year on this day. Katherine considered, as she always did. "Only that it took me so long to find my courage, to find you." Owen squeezed her hand gently. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in the fierce colors of Wyoming twilight, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear, the escape, the slow rebuilding of trust, the gradual opening of her heart. "They laughed at my scars," she said softly, remembering those first difficult days in Redemption Springs when whispers had followed her through town. Owen nodded, remembering too. They didn't understand what they were seeing, the marks of a warrior who had survived a terrible battle. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his steady presence as she had for 2 decades. "I'm grateful, you know, not for what happened, but for where it led me. To this place. To you. To our children." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple, where silver now threaded through her once dark hair. "To our story," he murmured, "the one we're still writing." As they made their way back down the hill toward home, where their children and grandchildren would soon gather for the anniversary celebration, Katherine felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become her daily companion. Life had not been perfect. There had been droughts and blizzards, illnesses and losses, arguments and reconciliations, but it had been authentic and deeply lived, every day a choice freely made. The scars that had once marked her as damaged now told a different story, one of resilience, of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, who had built a life filled with love and purpose from the ashes of suffering. They were a roadmap of her journey, honored by the man who had seen their true meaning from the very beginning. As the ranch house came into view, lights glowing warmly against the gathering dusk, Katherine felt the rightness of it all settle in her bones. This was home. This was healing. This was the life she had fought for and won, step by painful step. And it had been worth every moment of the struggle.